Well, it comes through the town. The money actually comes from the delinquent taxpayer.
But am I wrong in saying that there will still be some more in-rem proceedings next year?
Oh, next year there would be.
Right.
We don't know how many, but it would depend on the number. Like the first year there were 72, and it was a lower rate.
Right, sure.
This year we only had 35.
Right.
I have no idea how many we'll have next year. So it really depends on the number of.
Is it not prudent to put something in there to be?
No, because it doesn't cost the town any money. It comes from the taxpayer.
Yeah,
Okay.
we probably should have, again, the same way we should have.
The delinquent taxpayer, you're right.
We probably should have. Yeah.
You're right.
Let me explain. For reporting purposes, we have to show the expenditure on the line under the attorney, but there's revenues that come in that are paid by, right, and that is shown in revenues. So the revenues go up and offset the
Mr.
charge.
Dr. Busen is right. We should probably, we should highlight both those. We should make it clear. We should separate those out. So we need an extra line next year, a row, where you have on the revenue side
we can add
the NREM revenues, and then on the cost side the NREM costs. So
you're talking about creating a line now that's going to identify just the cert process.
I'll just explain the.
Well, I think it's easier. I think
All right,
Dr. Busen.
We can explain it in the actual.
Well, if we're going to explain it, then we understand what the numbers are. The numbers, the explanation is what you need, and something, Dr. Busen, you probably are aware of the effort, but this is going to be the real budget with the narrative. Okay, all right. So the key thing here that everybody needs to understand is that this is what the budget used to be: a couple pieces of paper with just a bunch of numbers with no description. But what we've changed is just the total way of thinking of presenting the budget to the public. So the narratives you're going to find in here, okay, and the narratives are available to anybody.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good. Other questions? Sure. Other questions, comments from the public? Okay. Now, Town Attorney Noto. So we're not. Do we vote now or do we?
You have to close the public hearing.
Right. Okay. Then we have it
later in the meeting.
Yeah, that's we have it later in the meeting. Okay. So can I get a vote? Further questions from the comments on the preliminary budget? Okay. Can I get a vote to motion to bring this public hearing to an end?
So moved.
Second. Gilford.
Aye.
Mendocino.
Aye.
Nyors.
Aye.
Villanova.
Yes.
Partridge.
Yes. Okay. Terrific. We're going to let's go to the minutes of the last meeting. Any comments on the minutes from last meeting? Can we get approval for the minutes from the last meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Vote.
Gilford.
Aye.
Mendocino. Nyors.
Aye.
Villanova.
Yes.
Partridge.
Yes. No, we did. You missed it. You missed it all.
I missed all
You
of
got to
that.
get here early these days.
Sorry.
Hope. Would you give us the town report?
Sure. Submitted to the local shares, submitted to the supervisor from the town clerk's office for the month of November 2010, $1,492.90, and for November 2009, $1,428.15. Tax collections for the month of November 2010, deposit to the supervisor of the town of Rye, $652,901.08. Deposit to the village of Portchester, to the treasurer of the village of Portchester, $164,585.17. Deposit to the treasurer of the village of Rybrook, $25,685.96. A total collections of $843,172.21.
Thank you, Town Clerk Vespia. Mr. Nowotny?
You have a copy of the Crawford Park activity report. As of November, we're at $105,570. Our preliminary look at December shows another roughly $4,500 to $5,000. So we're going to come in about $110,000 this year against $92,000 last year, or roughly. I think it finished out about 98 last year. I just want to address one comment that was made during the public hearing session. whether you adapt the increases as proposed or modify the increases to Crawford Park usage, there are a number of items in there that lower the overall usage of the park or the projected uses of the park. So we're not projecting, if you look in our budget, we're not projecting a huge revenue increase for Crawford Park. There's a blip there. It's about 10% or so in terms of in revenue improvement next year. The primary thing is we think that the pricing will mitigate some of the excess usage that we have currently. And if people want to go there, they're going to have to pay what amounts to a fair market rate. So that's really one of the points I wanted to get out.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, before we ask for comments from the public, comments from county legislators. No, I see Mr. Rogowsky is one.
Good evening, Supervisor, everybody. I'm Marty Rogowsky, the County Legislator representing Rye Town. I just wanted to come by, take 2 or 3 minutes if I could to, because the county just, we passed our budget the other day. We expect to get a bunch of line item vetoes tomorrow from the county executive, but I did want to come and take really just 2 or 3 minutes to explain my vote, because some of my constituents have specifically asked me to explain myself. The budget passed 16-1. And I was the one negative vote, so I thought I owed it to my localities to explain it. We received a budget from the county executive, and I give him a lot of credit. He worked hard. He went through our budget. He cut a lot of places. He was laying off a lot of people. But with the 450 retirements, we had an early retirement program and the state incentives. With the 450 who went out the door in early retirement, his proposal to lay off 225 people. And all the other cuts, everything he did, his budget still would have had a 4% tax increase with everything he did. But he had an objective he had to reach, so he proposed to borrow $10 million to pay for tax certiorari's and $20 million to pay for the pension costs next year. So with that $30 million borrowing, he went from +4 to -1. So that was the budget we got.
Sorry, could you just explain that to me?
Sure. So
all his changes.
It still would have been a 4% tax increase. He then proposed $30 million worth of borrowing for operating costs.
Instead of expenditure.
10 million tax certiorari. Instead of just, as we've always done, year after year after year, for the first time, he proposed to borrow $10 million for tax certiorari's and $20 million to pay for our pension costs. Our pensions were going to be $77 million next year.
Oh, I see. Okay, so
and
he financed it with $30 million of borrowing rather than taxes.
Right, rather than taxes, $30 million worth of bond revenues.
And that took it to -1.
And that took it to -1. Politically, very popular. My colleagues in the Board of Legislators sort of like the idea, because we hear from our constituents, lower taxes. I was able to convince my colleagues that certainly borrowing for tax certiorari's is a terrible idea. We've never done it. And so we figured out a way not to do that. So the Board of Legislators' budget does not call for borrowing. However, I guess the temptation to take the $20 million borrowed for the pension money. So instead of spending $77 million next year on pensions, we're going to spend $57 million. $20 million savings because we're able to borrow the state control. And I guess the offer has come to all the localities. The state controller said you can borrow at 5% a stabilization program for pensions. And in any event, Mr. Astorino supported that, and frankly, the Board of Legislators said we're going to do that too. I get 2 main messages from my constituents. 1, cut taxes. 2, try to run government more like a business. And I got input from a lot of business people. And went back and forth, and I finally had to decide whether borrowing anything for operating purposes is really a good way to go, because it's kicking the can down the road at 5% next year. You saw the paper yesterday, the medical centers pensions, $40 million. Nassau bonds are down at junk because they borrowed $100 million to pay back tax certiorari's. And as these counties and towns do this, it's increased debt. We see it in Washington. We see it all. So I had to make a judgment. Do I go along with everybody else or try to keep this issue of borrowing in front of the public? Because the state has to change all these rules. And if we go, geez, we just lower taxes, people say, well, I guess there's no problem. There's a major problem. There's a major problem. So, honestly, the proposal I would have supported, that if they followed my advice, we would have had a tax increase of 1%. 1%, pay for the pensions, pay for the tax certiorieries, move on.
And borrow nothing.
Borrow nothing. If you saw the weekend, Nassau County, their bonds are down to junk status now, and they came.
Just remind people, what's the size of the budget?
$1.8 billion.
Isn't this a lot to do about nothing? I mean, who's kidding who? At the end of the day.
Well, at the end of the day.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's a $1.8 billion budget. And the difference is whether you borrow or you don't borrow. Ultimately, quite frankly, I tell you what the constituents want. They want to eliminate county government. That's what they want to do.
No, they don't. But we'll take that up at a different time.
That's what they want to do.
No, they don't.
If you're going to come here if you want to have the debate,
I'll be happy to have that discussion.
But what they really want to do is eliminate. We're on record to eliminate the town or government. We've secured financing for that. What we ought to do is secure financing to study the elimination of county government. That will generate real savings for the people.
You can do that, and I think your constituents will contend that you're wasting money to make that study. But I'm happy to have that conversation. I'll come back and debate it. I think what's more Mickey Mouse, if you will, is zero. We've averaged a 2% tax increase for the last 5 years. Whether it's 2, 0, 2, 1, 0, minus 1, that is $5.5 million. I agree. That's those numbers, plus 1, minus 1. It means a lot politically, is 0, but in the real world, Mr. Supervisor, you're right. The principle of borrowing to pay operating expenses, that's not a minor issue. So I would take exception to you. The concept, if government, and look at Nassau, look at governments, right? Once governments start to borrow to pay for operating expenses, my opinion, very dangerous precedent. That's what I was fighting. I mean, he didn't borrow $150 million, but one could argue, geez, cut taxes 50%, borrow $150 million, and cut taxes way down. So I disagree with you. The concept of borrowing is very important.
Well, I guess,
very important. Whether it's 1, 0, minus 1 is,
I guess the other
is not
question,
important.
well, I would have felt more comfortable. I understand your point, and I think it's a fair point.
But so that's why I voted the way I did.
I understand, but I think I would feel a whole lot more comfortable if you felt that you should have rather than 1% tax increase, you take another $30 million out of the budget. I can't believe in a $1.8 billion budget that you can't find another $30 million. Actually, I cannot. It's just.
But that is the mistake that people make.
There's not one business in the United States of America. There's not one business in the United States of America that you can't take 10%.
Mr. Supervisor, you just went through the analysis. I walked in. Money comes in, then it goes out to pay the lawyers. Our budget is $1.8 billion. Our property tax is a little over $500 million.
Right.
$26 million to the MTA right off the top. $210 million to Medicaid to New York State. $80 million for early childhood intervention. So you go through our budget, plus pensions, plus health care costs. You don't have $1.8 billion. Oh, let's cut another 30. To Mr. Astorino's credit, we're down. His proposal was down 700 employees, and closing down the Section 8 office, transferring out the mental health clinics. I mean, he went through that budget, and to his credit, he did a lot of stuff. He was at +4 because you get to the point where you have hundreds of millions of dollars of mandates. $50 million for inmate health care. We could have had a zero tax increase in 2010. It would have been zero. You know what? We got to spend $50 million on health care for our inmates. 100% paid for by county property taxpayers. Nobody knows that. That's a federal mandate. So you say, and you or other people say, oh, just cut. You can't cut that $15 million. You can't cut the $210. You go through this. Mr. Astorino probably did as well as anybody, to his credit, to cut back where you can, where one can. And still, because of all those mandates, so it's not so easy just, cut another $30 million. But I'll be happy to come back and I know you have the rest of your meeting. I'll be happy to discuss county government and all the issues involved anytime, any place. It's one of my passions.
Well, I'd love to do that. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Thank you.
And healthy, happy
holidays.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Thank you. Other comments from the public? Exactly. They're
Richard brings it all the way back.
Yeah. Any comments from the public? Okay. I'm going to move to the next item then. Okay. Adoption of the 2011 budget. Well, okay, this is probably a good time for that because basically for the third year in a row, we're going to be reducing taxes here in the town of Rye. Mr. Byrnes?
Okay.
Just the summary.
I'll give you the summary. The only thing I want to point out, the change from the preliminary budget to the proposed adopted budget that you have in front of you as a resolution was at the work session on Saturday, the board approved a 2% salary increase for the